Well, Mark, first of all, thank you very much for your very kind introduction. It's my great pleasure to be here. And I try to explain these topics as clear as I can. And I hope that will help me at the end with your answers. There were many words spoken about genocide during this conference, during other conferences, and there are many activities going around the world dealing with one single question: how to prevent it. And allow me to concentrate on this question also on this occasion. January next year, there will be 60 years since enough number of states members of United Nations ratified the United Nations Genocide Convention. In this convention it is written, genocide is a certain act undertaken with the intent to destroy, in whole or in substantial part, a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group as such. Well, there were many reasons for adopting such a convention. I will now show you a few slides dealing only with the mass murders and genocides in last and this century. Armenia, Soviet Union, Europe, Holocaust, Yugoslavia, 1945, 1946, Mazirev, you see, China, tens of millions of people killed, Rwanda, Bosnia, Mazirev in Srebrenica, Darfur, Eastern Congo. This is the report from United Nations from September the 8th, 2010, when they said that the United Nations has reported that more than 500 systematic rapes were committed by armed combatants in Eastern Congo since late July. More than double the number previously reported, and accepted partial responsibility for not protecting citizens. This happened a few months ago. First of all, we have to ask ourselves why genocide happens. How it is possible for someone to persuade a group, a large military unit, a political organization, his fellow compatriots, to commit such a big crime? Well, from the history we know the answers for ancient times. Roman legions destroyed many tribes in Europe and in a wider Mediterranean area because those tribes didn't want to surrender to Roman law and they didn't want to pay taxes to Rome. Genghis Khan eliminated many towns, annihilated tens of thousands of inhabitants in China and Central Asia because he ruled with the help of fear. And he destroyed the towns because he knew that next town will surrender without any efforts. He used the fear as a tool to conquer. Well, but all this happens centuries or millenniums ago. What about the genocide committed in 20th century? What about, for instance, genocide that happened 15 years ago in Srebrenica, in the middle of Europe, 6 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall? In July 1995, the United Nations Protecting Force, represented on the ground with one big battalion of Dutch peacekeepers, failed to prevent the town's capture by the army of Republic of Srpska and the subsequent massacre by the Bosnian Serbs of more than 8,000 civilians and prisoners, mostly men and boys. By seeking to eliminate a part of the Bosnian Muslims, the Bosnian Serb forces committed genocide. They targeted for extinction the 40,000 Bosnian Muslims living in Srebrenica, a group which was emblematic of the Bosnian Muslims in general. They stripped all the male Muslim prisoners, military and civilian, elderly and young, of their personal belongings and identification, and deliberately and methodically killed them solely on the basis of their identity. I'm telling this because this is not the first time when such crime happened on the same place. The International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, ICTY, located in The Hague, ruled that the massacre of the enclave's male inhabitants, accompanied by the forcible transfer of all the women, children and elderly, constituted a crime of genocide. This was official statement of ICTY. But former Yugoslav People's Army General Ratko Mladic, he has been accused by the ICTY as the main person responsible for this crime. He still remains at large and is suspected of hiding in Serbia or in the entity within Bosnia and Herzegovina called the Republic of Srpska. Ratko Mladic was the mastermind of this massacre. In 2005, 10 years after this genocide happened in Srebrenica, in a message to the 10th anniversary commemoration of the genocide, the Secretary General of the United Nations described Srebrenica as the worst crime on European soil since the Second World War. This statement of the Secretary General of United Nations is not really correct. Namely, after the Second World War, from May 1945 to November 1946, more than 100,000 people were killed in former Yugoslavia, Bosnia included. Some of them on the same place, Srebrenica. They were killed by Yugoslav communists. After the democratic changes in Slovenia, I have more detailed data only for Slovenia. So after the democratic changes in 1990, only in Slovenia, which is area spreading over 20,000 square kilometers, small place, we found over 600 burial places, mass graves. And among the burial places, many are considerably larger than the ones in Srebrenica. Considerably large. The last massive burial ground was discovered in 2009 in the deserted mine of Hudajama, 40 kilometers away from the capital of Slovenia. I wrote this down a few days ago, and I was not correct because the last, even larger massive grave was discovered yesterday, close to the Slovenian-Croatian border. But this Hudajama grave, this is the deserted mine shafts, and it holds thousands of partially disintegrated bodies and unburied male and female skeletons, mostly without any gunshot wounds. The victims in those massive burial places were prisoners of war, civilians who didn't want to cooperate with the communist regime established in Yugoslavia after the Second World War, and also civilians from different ethnic minorities. Why it is important to confront the statement of the Secretary General of United Nations, which was not correct. It's important exactly because Srebrenica happened precisely for the reason that Europe and the world forgot such massive and unpunished killings in the former Yugoslavia in the first 2 years after the Second World War. And this is why the sad history repeated exactly 60 years after at the same place. General of the former Yugoslav People's Army, Ratko Mladic, and his lieutenants in Srebrenica were end products of Yugoslav military and communist academies, which taught that the essential objective of the class struggle or armed conflict, any armed conflict, is physical destruction of the opponent. They were not white killers coming from jungle. They were educated to do it. So it is not enough to pursue the actions of Milosevic and Mladic as only extremely nationalistic. And it would be totally wrong to blame whole Serbian nation for it. Something is missing, and the missing part may well fully explain Srebrenica genocide and the enormity of other brutal crimes in Bosnia and Herzegovina, partially also in Republic of Croatia, Vukovar, and in Kosovo. And this was what is missing in explanations, is the junction of nationalism and communist ideology. It is this junction which produced the National Socialism in the Bosnia at the end of the 20th century, in the times when we believed such monstrosity cannot be possible anymore. The communist method of destruction was applied in the time of the communist revolution in Yugoslavia after the Second World War. It was totally neglected. It still is. And the statement of Secretary General of United Nations is living proof for that. And because it was totally neglected, it was repeated in Srebrenica exactly 60 years ago, later, 15 years ago. This is the case of Srebrenica. What about genocide in Darfur taking place in 2006, 2007, 2008, 2009, 2010? How to prevent genocide in the 21st century? I think this is one of the most important questions of the whole mankind nowadays. For committing genocide, they mostly use racial, ideological, and religious backgrounds. Sometimes they mix them. Nazism mixed racial and ideological explanations, which was called National Socialism. Janjaweeds in Darfur are using racial and religious argumentation. Mladic in Srebrenica used ideology and racism as justification for mass killings. So to fight against genocide and to prevent such atrocities, we must first fight against this argumentation, against racism, against all totalitarian ideologies, without exceptions, without arguing which is more or less bad, and against all militant religious concepts. The most important tool to do that is education. We must know what has happened and why, and we must know the reasons and consequences. We have to be aware of what is currently going on in Sudan and Congo, and we have to care about it. This is the paper which was delivered to me 4 years ago when I visited in Washington, the National Holocaust Museum. It is an institution which has to be seen. So when you travel to the United States, I recommend you to visit it. But there was another thing which touched me deeply, and it was not linked directly to the Holocaust. This was the alert paper which was delivered at the entrance to this Holocaust Museum in Washington. And on this paper, a group of people, also from the leadership of the museum, also people, personalities, who survived the Holocaust, they called for action in Darfur. In this paper, they described what is going on, what are the consequences. They published the website of the Committee of Conscience, where still you can, fortunately, get fresh information about what's happening in Darfur. And they also, at the last, on the second page of this paper, they wrote a few things. What can I do to prevent the genocide? When I was thinking what to say, what we can do, I found again this paper, and I will just quote some points. First, keep informed. Find out about what is going on. Your gateway to more information is not only this website of Committee for Conscience, but there are many websites when you can more or less get updated information about what's going on in Darfur, Congo, and other unfortunate sites of the globe. The second thing, what we can do, anybody, is not to be silent. Contact the media. Write a letter to the editor or of your local newspaper or to other news outlets to comment on their coverage of Darfur, or to express your views about the importance of public attention to the story. It has become some kind of set rule of world media that when there is a problem and nobody is solving it, nothing's happening, things are repeating all the time, they just switch from this problem. They don't cover it. So with our personal involvement, we can break this silence. The third advice written on this paper from the Museum of Holocaust was that we have to communicate with the government. We have to tell our government representatives our views and concerns about events in Darfur. Politicians are, or we are, we depend on public opinion. So getting hundreds or thousands of emails, nobody nowadays is writing, by hand, nobody would read it. But sending emails, it's easier and it is effective. It is effective. So if we take action and if we communicate with the government, we can do something. The fourth point is to support relief efforts. There are hundreds of websites when we can find different relief organizations mounting efforts to help civilians affected by the crisis on different parts of the world. And the fifth advice is to get engaged in our local community, to talk about Darfur or other sites to our friends, family, members of organizations we belong to, co-workers, and help spread the word. There are others who are doing the same, and with the network created, we can do even more. So, your voice can make a difference. First thing to do is not to be silent. It is not enough if we care for ourselves. Next step is to communicate, not be silent. So everything what I said and many other things which can be done by individuals, this is a lot we can do as individuals. And this is important. But at this point, we have to ask ourselves, is this all we can do as a humankind? As a race which reached the moon and established United Nations, European Union, African Union, community of Latin American countries and Caribbean, other organizations, achieved many other things. The answer is obvious, certainly not. This is not all we can do. So what should be the next step? The next step, we have to cross through institutions. We have United Nations Charter of Human Rights. This charter formally guarantees equal basic human rights for all individuals of human race on the globe without exceptions. It is written and it is valid. Well, as we discussed yesterday, the problem with this charter lies in its, or with the problem in these rights, about these rights, lies in its protection. And this protection depends from continent to continent, from state to state, even from region to region in the same states. These universal human rights are not equally protected around the globe. But we have the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. The Convention, the most important part I quoted at the beginning, was the result of years of tireless campaigning by the lawyer Raphael Lemkin. He was Jew from Poland, escaping Holocaust, traveling to United States and fighting against genocide, and this with great success. This convention has shaped the Second World War and confronted the 20th century with its horror. Adopted at the United Nations General Assembly on December 9, 1948, the convention entered into force on January 12, 1951, after being ratified by the necessary 20 signatures at that time. The convention is currently ratified by 140 states. Whilst the convention laid the groundwork for the definition of the crime of genocide and put in place a legal framework to help guide the work of its prevention through the mechanism of international law, the definition of genocide itself in the convention has remained relatively narrow. And as we said yesterday, the world has changed in the last 60 years. And only with the creation of the International Tribunal for Crimes in former Yugoslavia in 1993 and the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda in 1994, the United Nations, after many decades, secured the first ever conviction for the crime of genocide in the 90s. A major criticism of the response to the Rwandan and Bosnian genocide was that it was reactive rather than proactive. Reactions afterwards. While the international community has developed a mechanism for prosecuting the perpetrators of genocide, it has not implemented a legal process for halting genocide as it occurs. So the most important priority is not to punish those guilty of committing crimes of genocide, but rather to prevent the genocide from being committed in the first place. This is the most important thing. Mr. Mark Donfried, president of ICG, sent a letter to us recently writing that the Institute for Cultural Diplomacy is promoting an initiative focused upon achieving a fast-track concrete legal resolution to halting current instances of genocide taking place in conflict zones across the world as a continuation of the historic work of the Polish lawyer Raphael Lemke. And when I read this letter, I thought that this is exactly what we have to do if we want to be more efficient. It's quite strange, but through many years, nobody really noticed this lack of legal background to do something. Maybe many did, but nobody did anything to change this. So drafting and collecting support for such a concrete legal resolution among the public all around the world, among legal experts, artists, sportsmen, NGOs, former and current politicians, could itself raise awareness, and this action can trigger a massive energy leading to global atmosphere where it would be impossible to confront seriously an urgent and noble endeavor. But somebody has to start it. And I am convinced that ICD can collect many allies from the same beginning, and I'm looking forward to cooperate with all of you in this much-needed enterprise. Thank you. And thank you especially for the Mark and other colleagues which launched this initiative. Sometimes launching initiative is the most important step toward the final victory.
No, really, let me express my gratitude to you for having given us much of the inspiration and much of the strength to begin a huge initiative where maybe we can have a small difference. But I share your optimism. I think certainly we have to start, and I think we do have a lot of momentum, as we discussed at the advisory board yesterday. But before we discuss the initiative, I would be very happy to take your questions and your comments to a really very thought-provoking and very deep reflection on one of the largest challenges facing us today. Let's try to take as many questions as we can. Do you suggest should we group a few questions, or how would you like to? I see many hands. Let's start maybe in the front, and we'll move towards the back.
Thank you. I had to write it down. So, Prime Minister Jansa, if that's the way you pronounce your last name, sorry about that. You titled your presentation, "How Can We Prevent Genocide? What can we do?" Yet you only touched on it very faintly. What you spoke about in greater depth was past and current genocides, which in no means should be undermined, and mechanisms that probably many of us are already aware of. But what I'm interested in is your comments about transformation of non-genocides, which is what you should be talking about, of non-genocides to genocide in areas of concern like northern Uganda, Burma, and other regions. Okay, sorry.
Well, okay. Well, maybe it's better. I apologize because I didn't say at the beginning that those pictures and those mentions, these are not all cases. We unfortunately, we can spend all hour just naming those atrocities all around the world. So I didn't want to collect everything. This was just a few cases to illustrate the situation. It would be a long discussion if we want to make a whole list.
Okay, maybe I'm trying to pick people who haven't asked questions before. I think.
Hi, my name is Anna, and I would just like to know your opinion about Serbia. I feel that lately in the media, Serbia is being criticized maybe a bit too much for the wars in the 1990s, and also a lot of Serbian nationals are being punished, while the other states, the other former Yugoslav states, are maybe not criticized as much in the West, in the Western media. And also I would like to know your opinion about the creation of the country of Kosovo.
maybe two from the back, and I'm trying to get all sides of the audience if we can.
Thank you very much. Let me first say I am, of course, fully against any kind of genocide. I support your view of what happened in all parts of former Yugoslavia was terrible. I worked there since '74. I happen to know it quite well. And I support the ICD initiative. Having said that, I'm skeptical to a couple of things, if you permit me. If you use a concrete case of Srebrenica to further the initiative, then please give it a little bit more serious conflict analysis. Srebrenica is not a black and white thing. Those of you who are interested in it, go to the book that Carl Bildt, the former Swedish Prime Minister, now Foreign Minister, and before that, High Representative in Bosnia at the time when it happened, wrote about this. His presentation of the complexity of Srebrenica is worth taking into account. This was not only Mr. Mladic, drunk and desperate, doing the bad things he did. There was something happening at least 1 to 2 years before in that area. It had also to do with what is a shameful thing for UN members. The United Nations Security Council had set up the idea of 6 protective zones in all of Bosnia. Gorazde, Sarajevo, Tuzla, Srebrenica, and a couple of places more. The idea was that there the Muslims would be protected as refugees when they went there. The United States and other Western countries violated that agreement that they had themselves done and secured that inside the 6 safe zones for refugees were the main military ammunition depots and command centrals of the Muslim Bosnian army under Mr. Izetbegovic. What the West created was a mixture of refugee camps and military ammunition depots. Secondly, it did not make the soldiers available for the UN. The UN chief at the time, the Swedish General Mr. Wahlgren, who was a personal friend of mine, made a report to the UN saying, if we are going to secure the Muslims and everybody else in these 6 zones, we need 32,000 more UN troops. The world community gave him 1,200, all from Turkey. So point 1, don't blame the United Nations. At the time of Srebrenica, the United Nations could not pay the salaries to its staff because, among other things, United States had not paid its dues to the UN. Secondly, please mind you, in your story about this, what happened before the people were killed in Srebrenica, including the burning of Serb villages all around the place for months before this, by a military who has himself said from the Muslim Bosnian army that he did it. This is not a simple thing, so my first question to you is simply, where do you make the distinction between genocide and war crimes? You said 40,000 lived there and 8,000 were killed. Now, if I'm correct, about 2 million people in Bosnia are Muslims. If your own definition of genocide is correct, you cannot possibly say that 8,000 people killed out of 2 million shows an intent to eradicate a whole people, or a sizable proportion of it. In that case, the United States has committed the same in Iraq by killing more than 1 million people. So I'm just asking, could we be more careful with the words we use or more precise with our definitions? Secondly, and very quickly, you gave us something that is world history when you said that there are 600 burial places found now in Slovenia. I know your place quite well. I was there during all the war years, in and out of the country. The official status is that 3 to 5 Slovenes were killed when the JNA, your national army at that time, came to your republic with the idea of keeping Slovenia inside former Yugoslavia. That invasion, if you will, which it was not because you were not an independent state at the time, was done by a Slovene heading the Yugoslav army. His name was Stan Brovic, if you have forgotten it. Now, if you tell us today that there is 600 burial places, of which some are more than 8,000 people in Slovenia, I'd like to have the source, and I'd like to have, not now, but at some point from you, where these are. You mentioned one place, Hurajama, outside your capital, but this is world news, and I'd like to have it documented. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Oberg. I see just one final question, I think, from the front. I'm trying to take turns here, and then I'll give it back to Mr. Jansa, please.
Very good evening, Mr. Jansa. I've asked a lot of questions over here. I'll be leaving to London in 2 hours, but I'll try to be brief. I can't share the same kind of trauma that you courageously have stood up here to relate, and I'm not trying to patronize you in seeing deaths and even standing here to be able to make the kind of delivery you have made. I had wished I could ask a question which would be much more pointed, but it takes a lot. But it's just something I'll get straight to the point. There's the situation of, in March of this year, which I think you shared quite generally with us, that the Serbian parliament passed a resolution condemning the Srebrenica massacre and apologizing for Serbia for not doing more to prevent the massacre that took place. However, this seems to be a divisive issue, and I'm only saying it so you could help, because you've really expanded the scope of understanding of what happened there, because you were there. You virtually saw that. So if you could help just to carry the understanding that it seems to be a divisive issue, as the motion was passed by a narrow margin of 127 out of 250 MPs voting in favor. Actually means 123 were not in favor. And while the resolution was passed, it certainly was not supported by all. My question is, why do you think there was such a resistance to the issue, to issuing this apology after 10 years? And what does it say of the current Serbian government? And just as a quote, we have that there was a critic called Tomislav Nikolic, who leads the Serbian Progressive Party. This may be wrong, but he has suggested that the resolution was needed just for the sole need for Serbia's integration into the European Union. And he said that the ruling coalition just wanted Parliament to declare the whole nation guilty. And he stated that nations do not commit crimes, individuals do. So, again, with due respect, if you could help to just expand the understanding on that. And thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I will start with this, what you said at last. Individuals commit crimes. Individuals do it, not nations. This is why I said that it's very unfair if we blame whole Serbian nation for Srebrenica or Vukovar, all other atrocities. International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia was established to judge all crimes. Doesn't matter where and by whom they were committed. There are ongoing discussions in all area of former Yugoslavia dealing with if ICTY is doing fair, if there is no too many Serbs convicted and others not. But I think that it is dealing with a very difficult case, mostly fairly, and I think this is something which has to have our support. There are two levels of responsibility when we are speaking about genocide. First level lies with those who committed this crime. And this responsibility is not the same as the responsibility of those who could do more to prevent it. So there are two levels. We have to talk about both. We have to analyze both. But we have to be aware that there are two different levels. Also, not only if we discuss this issue from the philosophical point of view, but also if we discuss this issue from the legal point of view. The second what's very important is that crime is crime. You cannot and you should not apologize any crime against humanity with the events happened before. They all do this. We kill him or them because they did this and this. It was also suggestion to create these so-called safe havens, to support them, to protect them. There was a detailed plan made at that time, explained to international community. I personally traveled to Brussels, to United States, to Pentagon, to State Department with all maps. We discussed this with responsible people in Europe and in the United States. At the end, the resolution which was adopted in the United Nations, implemented 2/3 of this proposal. The protection was not good enough. The background for this protection was not good enough, but even this, which passed the Security Council, was not geared enough. There were not enough soldiers, as you said. There were not enough equipment, and the biggest problem was that there was no clear strategy. There was no clear strategy among those countries which contributed the military and other personnel to supervise this try how to stop the killings and genocide. It is not true that in these safe havens that there were large stocks of ammunition and arms of Muslim army, because Muslim army didn't have massive stocks at all. They were more or less armed with small weapons. They had big troubles to defend even Sarajevo. So I don't think there is any military excuse for attacking the Srebrenica or all other safe havens. And when you spoke about the proofs, you want to hear for these 600 massive graves in Slovenia discovered after 1990. Unfortunately, there are proofs. There are proofs. This is the number 600 is the number which is officially written in the report of investigation committee established by Slovenian government. All these graves are discovered. Some of them are excavated. You can go there and you can see the remains of the bodies. This is what I tried to show you on the picture. This is mine shaft close to Ljubljana, where they just threw thousands of people, not only soldiers but civilians, men and women, into the mine shaft. Not shooting them, just killing them. Strip them to the neck and then killing them. And the same formula was used in Srebrenica. This is why I mentioned this. Because people who did this in Srebrenica, they were taught how to do it. There were academies in former Yugoslavia, military academies, when this was in program. How to eliminate your opponent. And this is not Solomon formula for Yugoslavia. The same formula was used in Soviet Union and some other communist countries. But I agree that we cannot build all cases on Bosnia, on Srebrenica. The cases are different. The reasons are different. Unfortunately, the result is the same. Dead people, innocent people. And the majority of the world which is doing nothing. Which is doing nothing. So, about Kosovo, you asked about Kosovo. Well, I think that international intervention in former Yugoslavia, when they bombed the Milosevic forces, to prevent the massive killings and escape of tens of thousands of Kosovars from the country, that this intervention was just. there are still discussions going on if this was necessary or not. I think it was necessary at that time. If the international pressure would be stronger years before, I don't think this would be necessary. So there are always reasons and consequences. With this armed conflict, the last chance for Kosovars and Serbs to live together in one country, in one system, were buried very deeply. From that time, Kosovo was more or less calm because of the KFOR forces established there, and because there was practical border, or wall, almost wall, between Kosovo and Serbia established. And this was the reality. And when the parliament of Kosovo passed this resolution about self-determination and declared independence, nothing happened over the night. The situation stayed the same. But at that moment, there was great involvement of all international community to prevent the conflict to start again. Slovenia was at that time leading country of European Union. We communicate with the leadership of the Kosovo and of Serbia, not every day, but almost every hour. I respect very much current Serbian president. You mentioned difficulties which faced new government and Serbian president in parliament when they voted for this resolution about reconciliation. I think that even more difficult step for President Tadic was visiting Srebrenica, but he did it. He apologized. A few days ago, he visited Vukovar, where also Serbian paramilitary troops committed crimes. He apologized. He did something which was not supported by the vast majority of his voters. But the situation is slightly changing, mostly because of such a brave acts of the Serbian politicians of new generation. So maybe if they vote on the similar resolution after 5 years, they won't be 2/3 majority. But I believe it will be larger majority for this path. And there is one big encouragement, which was mentioned in the statement of Mr. Nikolic. It was turned twice around. But European Union itself, the European perspective, is working in the Western Balkans as big incentives for those countries to fulfill European standards and to enter the European Union. A few hours ago, European Commission published last report about the development of Western Balkans toward the European perspective. The report is not totally positive, not totally optimistic, but it's positive. It's in whole positive, and I think that this is very good. This is very good for the region. So, to conclude with more optimism, because we discussed things which are really so odd that I hope that after some period, nobody from young generation around the world will need to discuss this issue. But for today, we still need to discuss this issue. I want to say, to conclude this discussion, a few words about my personal experience. 22 years ago, I was tried before the military trial because of critical articles, put in prison. They threatened me to be sentenced to 15 years. It happened a few months ago with others. they got this sentence. There was, when I thought about my future at that time, when I thought about the possibilities for changes, I saw no hope. There was no hope when you are in solitary, when they threat you, you will be punished for 15 years. On the secret trial without the attorney, you knew that they can do whatever they want. You don't see any hope. This was 1988. June and July 1988. But this process, this trial, the arresting of a group which I belonged to, of young journalists, this event somehow triggered the public opinion. People went first time in Slovenian history after the Second World War to streets. They protested. There were massive protests. And country started to change. After 2 years, we held first free elections. After 3 years, Slovenia became an independent state. 2004, Slovenia became a member of European Union. At 1988, nobody in Slovenia dreamed about this. Nobody. If somebody would say at that time, Slovenia, after 3 years, Slovenia will be a democratic country, 2004, Slovenia will become a member of European Union, they would declare him as an insane person. It was totally out of reach. If somebody would say Slovenia will be a country which will be at the head of European Union 2008, nobody would believe this. Nobody would believe. But it has happened. It has happened, and there are solutions. There are possibilities. There are many possibilities in almost all situations. So there are all reasons to keep hope. There are all reasons to keep hope. There are all reasons to do something. There are all reasons to do something. It is not true that we can do nothing. If we decide together that we really launch this initiative to adopt the United Nations Genocide Convention, I think that we can start and we can collect massive support. We can collect massive support. We can change the things. We can influence even the very bureaucratic procedure in the United Nations. But if we start, I think that we can be successful. So there is place and space for optimism in almost every situation.